Blender 5.1 release candidate is now out, so as always on CG Dive, we'll check out the new rigging and animation features it brings. There are some great quality of life improvements, and the new bone info node, along with the geometry attribute constraint from Blender 5, are big steps forward towards a connection between Blender armatures and geometry nodes. Now let's check out the new features. In Blender 5 and earlier versions, both linear interpolation and constant interpolation were represented by these green lines. Now in Blender 5.1, we have green for linear interpolation and a brownish color for constant, and this cyan color for these other interpolation types which I don't use that much. I've been doing some animation exercises lately, and being able to recognize constant mode in the Dopesheet is definitely something I can appreciate. We have an improvement in subframes. Again, I'm in Blender 5 for a quick comparison. To enable subframes in the timeline, I'll go to playback and tick show subframes. And here the line of the playhead goes between the frames, but the frame itself breaks off and stays at the previous frame. So that looked a bit weird. Now in Blender 5.1, things are a bit different. The playhead stays consistent, and also we have these decimal values, which shows exactly where we are between the frames. A small update in weight paint mode. If I enable vertex selection and have the selection tool active, I can now Alt and click to select loops, which supposedly wasn't possible before. Personally, because I use Tab for Pi menu, what I usually do is just go to edit mode and select what I need to select, and then I go back to weight paint mode and I have my selection. There are performance improvements, which I'm always excited about. It's not something I can demonstrate, but let's take a look at the update log. It says that actions and shape keys should evaluate faster, and we have some numbers. Action evaluation is over 2 times faster, and shape key evaluation is between 130 and up to 300% faster, depending on hardware. If I understand this correctly, these numbers here are special tests that kind of isolate the action or shape key evaluation. In practice, in a production file, you can expect 4 to 14% speed up, which doesn't sound as impressive as 300%, but it is still very good, and these improvements have been piling up, and every little bit counts. The next update concerns shape keys. So I have a little example here. An object with a couple of shape keys. And the new feature has to do with the basis shape key. We can now easily make any of these shape keys the basis. As a little refresher, in Blender 5, we got a bunch of changes in shape keys, such as the ability to select multiple keys, drag and drop into reorder, and under specials, we got the make basis operator, which was a little bit confusing. If I enable the shape key and then use make basis, it will make that shape key the basis, but then the old basis becomes the inverse of it. So then I guess I can delete that, but then the other shape keys start affecting the basis in a way that I don't want. So let's undo. I was a little bit confused by that, and it turns out some people in the Blender Studio were also confused. So that is why we got the apply to basis operator. If I just click on it, this shape will now become the basis. The old shape disappeared, and all of the remaining shapes affect my mesh in a way that I personally find very logical. We have a new non-destructive smoothing modifier in the curve editor. I have a little noisy action here, and if I wanted to smooth it until now, I could only do so destructively by selecting the keyframes and going to Key, Smooth, and I can choose between a couple of smoothing algorithms. And this is the Gaussian smooth in action. But now if I select the Z location, I can go to modifiers here in the side panel and choose Smooth Gaussian as a non-destructive modifier. It will smooth out the curve right away, and we have control over the amount of smoothing. There is an influence slider, and we can restrict the effect of the smoothing to a specific range, let's say from frame 50 to 100. And this is our smoothed area. And we can also apply blend in and blend out to make the transition between the smooth portion and non-smooth portion more natural. In Blender 4.4, we got slotted actions. For more information, you can watch my 4.4 update video. And here in 5.1, there is a nice quality of life improvement for high-level action management. Basically, we can switch the animation of multiple related objects with just one click. One of the use cases of slotted actions is to group or organize animations of different objects, materials, properties, and anything you can think of under the same action. I only have this very simple example, but as far as explaining the feature, it will do great. So here I have this action 1 with an animation for 2 objects and also their materials. I also have an action 2 for these exact objects and materials. And to fully switch to that action, I would have to go through all of these objects and their materials and manually switch the action to action 2. And then I'll have this second animation for the same objects and materials. But in Blender 5.1, we can actually just select any of these objects and then go to Object, Animation, Replace Action. And now I'll switch this back to Action 1, click Replace, and I'm already playing the full Action 1 animation. We have the same feature under the Action Editor as well, under Action, Replace Action. Now I'll switch to Action 2. By the way, if you're still using an older Blender version, you can kind of do the same thing from the outliner. You have to expand the animation properties, find the action, right-click on it, remap users, switch to the other action, and it will be switched, but there are a couple of drawbacks of doing it this way. For example, if you have any action constraints or NLA strips, they will be replaced as well. And something else I noticed is that the previous action lost its fake user, which I had enabled, which is definitely a problem. So in Blender 5.1, use replace action. And by the way, there is another related feature. We have replace with new action. When I click on it, that will create a new empty action for all of the slots that were in the previous action. So now I can just name this action 3 and start creating a third animation for these specific objects and materials. Here are a couple of quick mentions, even though they are not exactly rigging an animation. I was quite excited about the Preferences search field. This is very similar to the search field in other areas, such as the Properties window. So if you remember the name of a specific preference, but you're not sure where it is, you can just go to the search and, for example, where was emulate 3-button mouse? I just need to search and it will point me to input, and it will even highlight the preferences that have emulate in their name, and it will gray out the other stuff. We have a new snapping mode, face center. Once I enable it, I'll be able to snap to the center of a polygon. And of course, this will also work with bones. Who knows, it might be useful somewhere. According to the update log, the FBX exporter now exports shape key normals, and that may solve some issues with game engines. Speaking of FBX, keep in mind that if you drag and drop an FBX into Blender, it now uses a new FBX importer, which has some benefits and it's faster, but under armature, it doesn't have the automatic bone orientation option. So if you need that, go to File, Import, FBX Legacy, and you'll have automatic bone orientation. One of the most interesting new features in 5.1 is the bone info node in geometry nodes. Bone info allows us to use any bone from any armature as an input in a geometry node setup. So we can drive things using a bone, but not the other way around. You cannot use bone info to affect a bone, but something like that can be achieved with the geometry attribute constraint that we got in Blender 5. So we already have at least the beginning of full interaction between armatures and nodes. And allow me to tease something cool. I've teamed up with a geometry nodes expert. His name is Radium, and this is exciting because normally I cannot properly cover some of the new geometry nodes features related to rigging. But with Radium's help, we've been testing interesting setups such as connecting bones to physics simulations. And these kind of tutorials will be coming to you on CG Dive, so subscribe if you don't want to miss that. And if you want to learn geometry nodes, check out Radium's channel and his interactive ebook on SuperHive. Here are the basics of the bone info node. First, I'll place this object in the hand of the character using bone info. So for the monkey, I'll create a new geometry nodes tree. I'll press Shift A, input scene, and here we find the bone info node. And so first I have to specify the armature and then the bone that we'll be using. You will not get a list of bones. At least for now, this is just text, and you have to enter the exact name of the bone that you want to use. So you have to go to your rig, pose mode, and then you could press F2 and copy the name of the bone that you want to use. I want to use my DEF hand, so I copied that, and now I can paste it in here. Next, I'll use a transform geometry node. And now to make the pose of my bone drive the object, we have these 4 pose options, but they are matrices. So you have 2 options. You could either switch the transform node to a matrix and connect them this way, and the object will jump to the position. Or if you want more control, you can switch back to components, drag a noodle from pose, and look for separate transform. And now you have separate translation, rotation, and scale that you can plug or not plug and use additional nodes for additional control. And if I want to adjust the position of the monkey procedurally, I could copy this node and plug it in here and playing with the values. And now the monkey is sticking to the hand. But if I move the rig in object mode, the monkey will not move. That can be adjusted by switching the bone info node to relative mode. Okay, here is another example, which may be slightly more practical. I have this gauge-like object. It is driven by geometry nodes, and with the fill value, I can control the gauge. In the rig, I've prepared a bone called gauge, and I want to make it drive this effect. So I'll disconnect the fill input, add a bone info node, set my armature, my bone name is gauge. I'll separate the transform. I want to use the X translation, so I want to separate the vector itself and then plug the X axis into the value that is driving the fill effect. This will appear a little bit filled already. That is because I use the pose output, which is a little bit like world space. Here I want to use a local pose, and this is more like using the local space of the bone. So now if I go here, I'm already driving the effect, but when I reach the end of the gauge, I'm at 0.5. So I need to multiply this value by 2. And now my setup is complete. So this should give you a basic sense of how bone info works, but look forward to more detailed tutorials and more interesting examples in the future. By the way, the Blender Studio just released a brand new high-quality course on facial rigging. You can get access to it by subscribing to the Blender Studio site. In this way, your money goes towards Blender development as well as animation production by the Blender Studio. A more direct way to support Blender development is through fund.blender.org. And if you want to keep getting my overviews of new rigging and animation features, please subscribe to CG Dive. See you in the next one.